You can be the hardest working designer in the room. You can ship beautiful work. You can be the one that everybody trusts to get it done. And still, you're not in the room where decisions are made. Because here's the trade-off. The better you get at execution, the more execution you're given, and the less you're pulled into defining what gets built in the first place. Does that sound familiar? Well, if so, stick around because today we're talking about how you can stop being the default executor and start defining what's worth executing. After 20 years in UX design, bringing entrepreneurship speed to corporate scale at Amazon, Kat Lowe learned that successful designers are those who make their work impossible to ignore. And she discovered this the hard way, burning out while working 3 times harder than her peers, delivering excellent work that was invisible because it wasn't aligned with what her organization valued. And the experience taught her that execution excellence alone is a trap. It makes you the person everybody goes to execute, not someone to go to for decision making. And breaking out of that trap required a different approach, which she distilled into 5 tenets, and we're going to talk all about those today. These tenets helped her shape billion-dollar opportunities through vision and execution, finding the everybody must win moments to drive alliance, including one worth $7.8 billion in market opportunity, delivered $218 million impact that anybody could have seen if they just looked. Kat, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I'm so excited to have you on, dig into this today. How is it going?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be on the show with you, the master of podcasts.
Oh, come on.
And this is my first ever podcast.
Oh, no way.
I've been on video, but never on a pod.
It's about the same anyway. You know, just if anything, I think it's nicer because we get to edit everything in post. We cut out all the stuff we say that makes us sound dumb, and then we just put the smart stuff in there, and everybody thinks we're brilliant. That's the great thing about post-production. So I want to dig into these 5 tenets that you've come up with, and this is how you've been able to break out of this trap. You had an interesting anecdote from Amazon that I thought made a lot of sense here. I'd love for you to dig into. So I want to start talking about those tenets. Tell me a little bit about Cold Start.
Cold start is the concept that when a seller goes to Amazon and lists their products for it to be available in the store, that less than 1% of these products actually generate a sale in the first 90 days, which means that it takes a long time for any new product to be discovered by any customer. That in itself is a problem statement that is extremely vague and extremely high level. There's multiple parts that goes into why doesn't it sell? Is it the way that the store prioritizes in the best sellers, not actually new sellers or new products? Those are all issues that different parts of the company needs to tackle. It might not be in your sphere of influence. This was the idea that our org wanted to tackle, but of course, we don't own every part of the puzzle. So the goal was to make leadership understand the importance of these brand new products. So if that was the case, then the storyline that needs to be written could be written from like a risk perspective. And the risk is that it's not living up to the vision of Amazon, which is we want to have every single brand and we want to have all the selection possible for customers to shop from. If there are no new things, then that means everything in the store will eventually be stale and old and you're not going to find something. So if that is the most important problem, then we should draw up a concept to show this. We started drawing concepts over almost 6 months. I've drawn up about 500 concepts on ways that this could be done. And at that time, of course, you're just like, okay, these concepts just don't mean these are solutions, but there's like parts and pieces of signals of areas that we need to test the bounds. Is this a hard boundary? Is this a hard boundary? Do an exploration scope.
I love this idea, especially thinking about your work as a growth designer. When it comes to opinions, I like this, I don't like that, I want this, I want that. At the end of the day, what matters, those little experiments that you're running and the data that you're grabbing from, that tells you the direction to move. So tell me a little bit about Tenet 2 and where this one helps you out every day.
There was one time when I went on vacation, I completed the design. When I came back, it did not look like anything that I made because the development made choices like of things that would make it go faster, and I understand the reasonings behind why they made those choices. Okay, I grabbed these components from a different library, I did this because it existed, this one did not. So it totally ignored the fact that it's designed this certain way because of this following reason. And I went the aggressive route. And the aggressive route was, let me create a metric on customer obsession. How obsessed are you in making sure that the customer received the thing? And of course, that's an aggressive way to do it, because that means that I can report on which teams are more customer obsessed. And of course, these leadership principles are at a spectrum. It is also a knob. Sometimes you're not as customer obsessed, sometimes you are. So what I did was I created a closed loop system, a mechanism. How many of these things that came in that is an issue occurred because of these design decisions? So I tracked them. And then I became a mini program manager where I tracked the burning down of these tasks. And what you end up seeing, it's much harder to change something after it went into production than to just prevent the problem from starting. So because of that, that becomes what I call the UX QA mechanism. So there's an idea that good intentions don't work. Everyone wants to do things properly. Everyone wants to have high quality, but doesn't actually work in practice.
The next tenet on your list, and I want to compare and contrast what we were just talking about and see how this aligns, but achievable now beats perfect later. In that example, we just mentioned this, fixing things once it's in prod is much harder than getting it right the first time. When we talk about this third tenet, achievable now beats perfect later, how do you reconcile those two almost paradoxical things?
The tenet as a whole is meant to close debates. They're supposed to be opposing. So then you have to put them in order in what you're going to do. If we have a debate, then we use this line. Scaling fast and doing things, it's more about trust building. When people don't know you and you started this project from the beginning, if you came with them with this overarching huge framework and you said, look, here are all the pieces of puzzle that you need to figure out, their brains will explode and say, well, what are you trying to tell me? We all know there's a million problems to solve. So that was not beneficial. To build trust, you actually should just deliver small and have a running downhill. Small, 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 small. And as people build trust in you that you're delivering, then you can ask for larger problems and then build momentum that way.
Let's talk about tenet number 4. Alignment is shared problem definition, not shared solution agreement. I think a lot of people fall into this trap where they assume alignment means we're agreeing. And alignment doesn't necessarily mean that we have agreed on a thing. It just means we understand the things the same way.
Yeah, so this one is more about the constant questioning about principles. What are the tenets we all believe in? Sometimes you won't be able to align on that. And then a lot of people come with different problem spaces. They say, my problem is more important than your problem. It swings back and forth. You say, okay, well, over time, has the problem improved or not improved? Did it improve enough? And is it time to move on to the next set of 10 things? So that part is more about designers coming up with a framework and working with researchers and influencing the business in deciding that these problems should be above the line versus below the line.
In the case of a lot of designers, we come into a project in the middle. Not all of us are always starting a project from zero, taking it all the way to the end. We've already started, and that alignment hasn't happened. When you get into that situation, what is your plan of action? How do you work with it so that you can at least get your job done?
Just be constantly annoying. Create visibility. Create a campaign. You are now a campaign master who talks about this, just talking about it all the time. It actually goes into the next storyline. The brand name generator is a perfect example of what that means. Recently, 2023, there was an article that came out on the internet. It said, why does Amazon have so much junk? And that junk means that when you look for a spatula, you get brands like Bank XXX, whatever. And then a series of weird characters. KLA, QQQ, whatever. IOC, blah, blah, blah. What happened to the Amazon with all of the names that we recognize in America? KitchenAid, What happened? Well, what happened is there was a bunch of names being generated or created, and people are trying to bring new selection. So we know that exists. But how come no one's trying to solve that problem? The strange names, we looked at them. We said, okay, let's just create a quadrant in what we believe a strange means. And strange could just mean a set of randomized characters. Let's just start there. And we discovered that 83% of them came from international sellers, people who want to sell in the Amazon marketplace, in a US based marketplace, that they simply use their language and use that to translate to English. So you could technically have a word that is real word that translates itself to English, and it just doesn't happen to make sense to an English origin person.
So
the point is they have good intentions on the name, but then it just doesn't translate to like a US audience, right? So like the whole point was, okay, what is the smallest thing we could possibly do with very little effort to test out we can like attack this problem a little bit. So what we made was a brand name generator. And you say, wow, what a strange idea. That idea existed a long time ago. When you wanted to get a name for a club or something, you can just type in a sentence and then just have it generate a bunch of names.
So what you guys did, just to be clear, you created a generator for sellers so that the perception of their name would not be quote unquote weird to a US audience.
Now, what's the difference between a regular name generator? Like so it's like, why don't you just go to ChatGPT and just generate a name? Why do you need to come to use our tool to make the name? The key difference is that the names are trademarked. So you're talking about trademarking a name in the system that's very volatile. So you have trademark lawyers. So in order for you to trademark a name, let's say you own your own IP, it takes at least 3 to 4 months to get that name, to get a name. So what you ultimately want versus what you'll get is completely two different things. And can we guarantee that the generated names will be final? No, we cannot guarantee that because that requires a lot more intervention in between. But what we can give you is the ability to check the database, the USPTO Patent Office database, and only generate names that are not available. So it narrows it down for you more rather than just say, hey, I think I should create a Nike with a Y in it. Like we know that will violate trademarks. We know that you can't have a name that sounds like another name. So rather than the seller just randomly coming up with things or paying for a lawyer to help come up with different words, we want it to be like make that process a little bit easier, especially when it's internationalized. So basically what we have is we are targeting international sellers. So for example, Chinese sellers who are bringing in like all of these spatulas, have them create a name that appeals for a US consumer that doesn't hurt our store.
You specifically called it 7.8 billion. What happened there?
That is the market size opportunity of the number of international sellers who are generating strange names. There's a percentage of strangeness that is coming, and it's a velocity graph. It's like how many strangeness is happening and how much not strangeness is happening. So how do we stop the velocity? Two disparate pieces. At first, when I wasn't looking for this at all, what I was doing was I was doing research on growth of a brand. How does a brand grow? Let's just demystify it and look at all of our programs and tools and what are the things that we do not have. I know we have a lot of things, but what's the gap? The area of the gap that I identified was there's no way to introduce or start something from scratch. We assume that someone has already started from scratch somewhere else. So a name could be one, visual identity could be one, logo could be one, all of the things that a traditional designer would possibly think about when they're creating something from scratch, like 0 to 1 scenario. And then we say, okay, I think this area has interesting things here that have not been solved or we could do something in this area to move the needle a little bit. And I think that this part was always below the line. Below the line meaning that it's not that important. We have other things to do. And that feedback was harsh from various groups, from different orgs. It's like, why? The trust factor of Amazon's more important than this name. So like you have competing problem spaces to say my stuff is more important than your stuff, so we shouldn't do your stuff. We should do our stuff. Whereas I have to say your stuff is important, this stuff is important too. So it's just about creating the we must win together narrative. So whenever we are speaking to others, it's like, what would you win from this? If we had a name that is great for people to put vessel in, they don't have to restart their store from scratch. As having a name is the start. right? So if you don't want this name anymore, you have to delete your whole account. There's no walking backwards. You cannot change that. It's a one-way direction, one-way door, not a two-way. So it's a very like strict box that you're put in. So the only way you can do it is like preventing. And if I said, okay, let's allow people to change it, then do we have a completely different solution? So that was one stream. It was like I was doing discovery. Then I cannot imagine that no one else in this whole organization has ever thought about this. And of course, I found who was looking at this. And that was the leader in China. The leader in China said all of our sellers in China want to bring more selection and they're just creating these names and we want to educate them. How can we educate them if there isn't anything to help them through this? So we must make this. And I knew that we were on the same problem space. And then now our org is not on the same problem space because our org has all these other priorities. So eventually what needed to happen is these two leaders need to be in the same room and have that sort of like a push.
I want to close this out and tie this up together all nicely with this realization that y'all knew this, but as individual contributors, we often have very little direct authority. And these tenets that we talked about today help us think about how we can frame conversations so that our team, non-designers, take us more seriously. That last example that you just talked about where you were trying to get these people in a room to solve this $7.8 billion opportunity, as an individual contributor, no direct authority to say, leader in China, talk to this person, blah, blah. How are you able to influence that decision to start investing into this problem to see how Amazon could solve it and improve?
Provide the data points from research. After the research, I drew a diagram for the framework. I said we have conviction and use the visual, like this is where the craft comes in. Execute on designs on what a generator would be. Execute designs on the framework of how this will work or how it would help other orgs and how it fits into the larger puzzle, like in a succinct way, like 2 images. And then be in the room. Keep talking about that you have conviction. This is the smallest thing we can do to test it out. And I don't think anyone would argue with that because it is very small. That's the beauty of small things. You don't have a lot of complexity to argue against. So the complexity part is this invisible problem worth it? Well, it'll be worth it because it was cheap.
Before we get out of here, just one last piece of closing advice for any designers who feel like they're stuck without any influence, without any real authority. How do they take some of the things we talked about today and start to build that influence in their own personal career?
So if you think that you're stuck at the vision level, meaning that someone keeps asking you to keep making mock-ups and everything, you can go to tenet number 1, which is find the smallest testable truth, right? To build trust and conviction. If you're stuck at like the execution level and decisions keep getting changed or whatever, you need to be doing tenet number 4, which is checking if you're aligning on the same problem. And if not, then you need to do something about aligning the problem, okay? And then if you don't know what to do next, right? If you're just sitting there and you're like, I already solved this problem in the problem space, maybe you need to do number 5, which is look around the corner. What are the invisible problems that no one's looking at and then point them in that direction? Yeah, I try to help multiple designers with their questions. And when I hear the same question repeated over and over again, I try to write out what I think about how to attack those. And it's really a personal writing blog and it's called fangboss.com, FAANG for corporate. Thank you very much. You can find me on Substack or on that URL.